Today's guest is Steven Reinstadtler. He's the infrastructure marketing manager at Covestro. So I'm really excited to dig in on the topic. You've worked for a big materials company on the coating side, and you've been involved in a bunch of things. But when I was doing my homework for this interview, one of the things that really stood out for me is you are a sort of science demonstrator for 32 years. What's that all about?
Yeah. We at Covestro, some of our former names, Bear, Mobe, over the years, we've always had a really strong outreach program, student outreach program, and so we've focused on that STEM education. And I tell people the reason I'm passionate about it is because it works, right? If it didn't work, if it was just nice, okay, that's one thing, but it really works. Doing those little nudges and getting students to understand STEM, that benefits anybody. That to understand how a concept works in STEM, there's no downside for that. So yeah, I've been doing through our program at Covestro, we go out into the classrooms and we do hands-on science experiments. And greatest thing is seeing the faces of the kids. Sometimes you do an experiment, even if they're not along, if they're just along for the ride, and they're showing all those signals of the arms are crossed and you can see their faces like this. But then all of a sudden they do an experiment, and let's say we do an exotherm and it heats up and you see the eyes get this big, and they're like, oh, well, that's pretty cool, right? So yeah, I tell people jokingly, I do it for very selfish reasons, because it's great when you're done, you feel a sense of reward there, dealing with those kids. So yeah, it's awesome.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm big at trying to promote, kids into those type of fields. I have young children. At the time of airing, probably will be 10 and 8 daughters. Like, as parents, you may get asked this a lot. What parents can do to engage their kids into that? I mean, obviously they can participate in events, but what is your answer when you get asked something like that?
Yeah, a parent does not have to have any background in STEM. They can have any profession. And what I tell people, because I've been asked that before, spark their curiosity. Ask them questions that maybe they wouldn't have asked, and let them know it's okay to ask those questions, right? You can have a business degree or an accounting degree, but if your kid is, looking at something or playing with something, you go, why do you think that works like that? Or what do you think makes that work that way? Or, just asking like little questions like that, letting them know it's okay to ask questions about that stuff, and get them to start the thinking process, right? That curiosity process. It certainly helps that the internet right now has a gajillion places you can go to find these little at-home experiments, right? That certainly helps the parent today, which my parents certainly didn't have when I was growing up, But yeah, there's a lot of resources out there to do this kind of thing, and just getting them to ask questions and know it's okay to ask questions. I think that's a great part of it right there.
Let's talk a bit about the coatings market. I mean, you've been at a coatings company, or materials company, for 30 plus years. How has the industry changed over that period of time?
Yeah. You pointed out, thanks for pointing out that I've been there 32 years. Thanks a lot for that. I really appreciate you making sure everybody knows, how actually I started there when I was 7 years old. Can I tell you? No, I'm just kidding. No, I'll tell you the big things that have changed. Some of the dramatic changes have been the focus from just making that dollar to really more of an encompassing, more sustainable look at this industry. It used to be 20 years ago, people would talk about, VOCs coming down from 450 to 340 gram per liter. In the case of floor coatings, below 50 gram. So, wrapping in and embedding sustainability into that, the overall way we do business, that's really been the biggest change. Where instead of just looking at performance, one of the components of performance was that sustainability factor there as well.
That's strong. I like that. So, so I think you talked about sustainability. I know when sustainability first started to happen, a lot of the innovations that were coming out cost more, right? And maybe there was a
Right.
stigma attached to that. Sustainability is not a financial, feasibility. How do you answer that? How's that evolved?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the industry has gotten smarter in the way they do it. So, globally, the way they just folks define sustainability, there's three components to it, right? There's that environmental component that we all think of. There's the social component. Early on, as you pointed out, you're absolutely right. People were just focused on that environmental component, and a lot of times the solutions that came up were more expensive. But fast forward a decade or two, and the industry has gotten smarter. So what they're doing is they're looking at what nature provides us, these different building blocks or different processes or waste streams, and incorporating those into products so that you have a product that could be defined as sustainable, but at a reasonable economic cost, because it's always a performance to cost ratio, right? And as long as you're thinking in terms of environmental or sustainability aspects being part of that performance, you just got to embed it into that performance. Then that ratio is going to make sense. Early on, what folks would do is they would go, "Oh, I have this really green product, right? It's bio based, right? They would, it's bio based. Well, I'm here to tell you, cholesterol is bio based too, and lead and cadmium and arsenic are all natural, right? So they would say, bio based are all natural, and they would take that and sit it up on a pedestal, and that's all they'd focus on. Well, you've got to look at all the other things that matter as well, the performance of the product and the economics of it. And that's where I think the industry has really come a long way. They're able to make these products that make more sustainable, sense. You know, there's a couple of really strong triggers, cost effective, the right, performance to cost ratio.
Yeah. So, with companies that are going in this direction, whether they're a contractor, whether they're a materials company like us, like I guess one of the things that always comes to mind is everyone uses these buzzwords, right? But there's certain companies that are
Mhm.
doing a better job than others in this. How do you cut through the clutter and educate the customer on some of the things that are happening to get them to make the best possible choice? Like how do you cut through all the claims?
Yeah. The first thing you got to do is you got to find um, a reputable source of information that is regionally or globally accepted. And at Covestro, one of those things that we've really focused on was the United Nations has their Sustainable Development Goals. They're called the UN SDGs. If anybody Googles that, you'll find a lot of information on it. And there's a group of these, about 17 of these goals that the UN has put together to say, these are how we as a society globally are going to progress sustainably. And many of them don't have anything to do with coatings, admittedly. But there's several of them, like SDG 9 talks about industry and innovation. SDG 11 is about sustainable cities. So when you read into those definitions for those SDG goals, you need to be able to understand that definition and then look at it from a standpoint of does that product or offering or activity meet that definition? So again, there are some triggers that are easy ones to look for, but that's one of the things is having a reputable source that has some really good defined definitions on what is sustainability or what is circular economy.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and I think looking at those goals, that's a great internal starting point. And so do you reference that in your communication to the clients as well, or does that just give you an internal guidepost to start?
We actually have gotten in the habit because we are committed to those goals globally. We've actually begun to include it on our brochures and on our technical information. When we're at conferences, if we have a parts card there or a technology card, we're including by that definition which of those SDGs does this fulfill. It's very much like years ago when the Green Building Council put out LEED. A lot of the manufacturers of coatings, if you look on their sheet in the upper left corner, it might say that it meets US Green Seal GS11, right? And GS11 means that it fulfills the indoor air quality standard of LEED. So I see these SDG goals being used very similar to that, where they can be a part of the product specification, basically, is that for whatever reason, whether it's durability, reduction of waste, energy efficiency, bio-based content, whatever those triggers are, that it's put on a spec sheet along with all the other performance data, right?
Yeah, for sure. Now you mentioned different seals and standards as, I guess contractors, but maybe more on materials companies, we're bombarded with all these standards that are required for different organizations from a state level to a, industry level or whatever. How do and you must, as a raw materials company, you hear the other side of this. How should companies navigate this, prioritize it? Because especially for smaller to mid-sized companies, you just can't do everything. You'll just go broke chasing the next new standard. How do you think about that?
Hmm. Well, I would say don't do anything different. Don't follow everything and add it on. This should become part of how you do business. How do you position your products? So if you're a small to mid-sized company, and let's say there's a QPL list out there, right? It lists a couple different products, and you're able to meet one of those products. Maybe that's a product that you use all the time as a contractor. Position it. Still, you would still bid that, but with the added dimension that your competitors might not have that are bidding on that job, that you are cognizantly thinking about positioning it as, okay, this has this sustainability factor that's part of those other performance factors, just like price, just like abrasion, just like waterproof, whatever. You're going to position that as you make the bid that your competitors might not be doing. By becoming that early adopter, you're really positioning yourself as the subject matter expert. You're becoming, let's say, that feeding trough, right? Once the horse comes to the feeding trough once, they know they can keep coming back to that. So that repeat business really does you good because you've positioned yourself as that subject matter expert. And obviously, you're looking, how are you going to monetize? How are you going to monetize? That's really by being that early adopter and being that subject matter expert, you set yourself differently than the other people that might be bidding on that business by factoring in those sustainability criteria as well as all the other performance criteria. It should just be wrapped around the way you do business.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. All right, we talked about the sustainability ability side. Now, in terms of technologies or the pandemic and the other shifts that are happening, what other trends or things are impacting the industry as you see it?
Yeah, really, it's related to the sustainability, but the whole durability factor. Um, I you know I remember teaching at a conference. It was about 2 or 3 years ago. If I say it's 2 years ago, it was probably 5 years ago, right? So it was a couple years ago. I was teaching a group of contractors about floor coatings, right? And we were talking about these higher performance type floor coatings that would last longer, right? And I remember I had a group of about 150 contractors from all over the country in the room. They were asking a lot of questions. I got done after 40 minutes, and there was a line of people waiting to ask questions. So we ended up having another half-hour discussion, and the whole durability topic kept coming back up. because many of them were used to using maybe a one component epoxy, which has, don't get me wrong, good durability, but we were talking about things that would take it up a notch, two component polyaspartics, for example. And the one contractor came up and said, can I ask you a question? So you've got these polyaspartics, I've heard of them, but I haven't ever used them. And we talked a little bit about them. And I said, certainly use me as a resource in the future. Well, sure enough, he took me up on that. And about a month later, my phone rang and he said, hey, I took your course. We were talking about the polyaspartics. I said, yeah. He goes, so I'm having a little bit of a problem. It doesn't seem like it's curing. I'm on a job site here and it doesn't seem like it's curing. It's kind of like Jello on the floor. And I said, okay, well, tell me what, what's going on. He goes, so, it's a 2-component polyaspartic. So I have component A and component B, just like you told me. And I put component A on the floor. You can kind of see where this is going, right?
We've seen this too.
And then
so
I
anyways.
put component B on the floor. And for some reason, it's not curing up. And I said, well, remember in the training how I said you mix component A and component B together, and then you put them on the floor? And you saw the light bulb go on, right? So, these higher durability options are only as good as the training that goes into them and the understanding of the contractor, right? So yeah, the higher durability is definitely a trend. And I touched a little bit there on as well, the training. Training has really changed, right? Over the last couple of years, even before the pandemic, you've got YouTube teaching people how to apply a product. During the pandemic, I could tell you I did over a dozen live webinars and those kind different things to fill in where we weren't able to do it live at conferences, right, in person. So that education component has been changing as well, and we just need to be adapting with it and having better ways to really get the correct training, especially on these higher durability products that have maybe a little bit different way of being used, right, than the traditional products.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now you started to talk about the training change. Now I'm interested in the extent of inspection and inspection technology, remote inspecting versus on-site inspecting. What are the sort of progressions there, and what are there any practical limits?
Yeah, I think not. Let's broaden that even, not just the inspection, but application as well, right?
Got it.
And even we could even include surface preparation, right?
Yes. Yes.
There's definitely a shortage of the professional trades. I don't think anybody will argue that fact. Prior to the pandemic, likely after the downturn of 2008, a lot of these professional trades folks, they had to go find a job somewhere else, and they haven't returned. So ever since then, the last 10 years or so, we've had professionally trained, folks with the correct NACE and SSPC certifications, right? There's been that shortage, and now with the advent, I see it as actually a very good thing. With the advent of being able to have AI and digital be able to do some components of that job. I say some because you still need to have a human behind the wheel, right? So for the surface prep, having these remote products that can do that surface prep, they're like, iRobots or iRoombas, on steroids. They can go around on a concrete floor and grind that floor without anybody behind the wheel. I mean, it's amazing to watch. I just stand there and kind of shake my head because for how many years have we had the person that was walking along at about a half a mile an hour behind the grinder, right? And now we can do that remotely. The application, let's say we're doing a building, they now have drones that can apply in the output. And now with the inspection as well, that can be done remotely as well to check for film thickness and quality. Even doing spark testing on, let's say on a bridge deck to make sure you don't have any holidays. So I see all of that really contributing to this underlying shortage of the professional trades. So in tandem with that education thing, you've really got to make sure that those trades are getting taught about these new technologies as well. It's not just being taught that you're going to be behind a grinder, and going with, trying to put a certain profile on that concrete floor. Now you need to be trained on how to use this more advanced piece of equipment. So if anything, more training is needed, even though some of the facets of their job might be going away. It's just going to change what they're doing.
Yeah, you mentioned something. I was talking to someone else recently and saying that some of the trades are labeled as just low tech, but what's actually happening
Hmm.
in those trades is a lot more high tech than people realize, and it's the storytelling that needs to
Yes.
to go up a notch. So, have you seen that as well?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why, somebody had asked me once, they said, well, you're really passionate around STEM education. I said, yes, absolutely. And they said, what about the trades? And I said, what about the trades? The, Bringing up that STEM education, as I said earlier, that benefits everybody. If you're an electrician, a plumber, an inspector, there are so many concepts there that if you're building on that from when a student is in second or third grade, that's not a bad thing. I mean, that is so important for any of those professions. And it also helps that because of the shortage, some of those trades positions are pulling down six-figure incomes, right? I mean, that's certainly a motivator as well, to kind of get away from that. Oh, this is menial work. I'm sorry, this ain't menial work anymore. They're bringing in a good paycheck doing that work. So, but yeah, the whole STEM idea, and this extra training on some of these more technical things, that's needed at any point in that value chain, right? Yeah.
What do you like about what you do? What are things that maybe it's in the industry things or otherwise where there can be some other improvements? Can you sort of give me a lay of the land on sort of your view there?
Yeah, maybe like in a typical, I do a lot of the courses for like architects, right? That you need to have for the CEU training. You got to have the benefits and drawbacks, right? You need to have that slide. So
Yeah.
I would say the benefit of being in this where I've been, that over that 32 years, and did I mention, thank you, for pointing out how old I am? Over that 32 years, um, I've seen a lot of different projects, a lot of different technologies, a lot of these different, and that's really a benefit to me. I wouldn't do well if you locked me in a room and I had to do the same thing every day, and that's really been a positive benefit for me, is being able to get out there and see all these different projects, whether it's in waterproofing or roofing membranes or floor coatings or corrosion coatings on bridges and water tanks. It's always something different, which really makes the time go faster, and you're much more involved and engaged that way. Um, I would say one of the more recent drawbacks is, um, my vehicle is a stick shift, 6 speed, right? One of my vehicles,
Mhm.
and so I in car terms we call that a handshaker, right? It's not an automatic; it's a stick. I like the feel of being able to go through those gears, right? Well, in the industry, I would say I'm a handshaker as well. I really like going out and engaging, and it's not that I don't love you here on the screen, but I'd much rather be talking to you in person, right? So that is a drawback here over the last year, a little over a year now, that not having these conferences and not having these different engagements with customers, all the different points in the value chain, that's been a drawback for me, because I really do value that, and I think you learn so much more. Every conversation you have, you're learning from somebody, and a different point of view, right? I'll share this one point of view with you. I was building we were in the process of building our house here about 15 years ago, and I was working with the contractor to get all these choices I had, right? And I'll never forget this one quote that I use even in my training, and I would have never had it if I hadn't stood on my lot here while we were building the house and had that one-on-one interaction. I said to the contractor, okay, what's some of the other choices I need to make? He goes, well, you're going to have a driveway. I said, yeah, I'll have a driveway. He goes, okay, what do you want? Do you want asphalt or you want concrete? And I said, well, I haven't given it much thought. I mean, what do you usually recommend? Like where we're at here in Pittsburgh, freeze thaw, blah, 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 what do you recommend? He goes, and he kind of did this kind of roll of the eyes and he goes, well, with concrete, I can give you guarantees. And I went, oh, okay. Well, what are those guarantees? He goes, well, I can guarantee it's going to get hard and I can guarantee it's going to crack. So I have an asphalt driveway, but I use that as a learning example of, I probably could have had that written down on paper that I had two choices and I just would have picked one. But having that one-on-one interaction, like I really miss that, and I'm really looking forward to getting back live with people. I know the Coatings Plus conference is coming up in December. That'll be the last SSBC conference. I'm really looking forward to being there live and seeing a lot of our industry friends, live. And then I'm really, fingers crossed, everything goes well. And we start in 2022 being able to get back live with people and continuing that journey, that learning journey with folks.